two members to join us, but we'll let them get caught up with the initial proceedings. All members, save for Mr. Cardillo and Ms. Treschler, are here and present. First order of the meeting is approval of the agenda. Should all have a copy of that. Is there a motion to approve or to amend?
So moved.
Second.
See, the council members know how to do it. Is there any discussion? All in favor of the agenda as presented, signify by saying aye.
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 The agenda is approved. Next item is approval of minutes, and we have two different sets of minutes. One set is a set from July 5th, which is the open session leading to a closed session to review the audit, the internal auditor company, and you should have those. So is there a motion? In our action in the closed session, we approved one of the auditors, and I assume that's public information at this point. Is that correct, Julie? Yep. All right. So is there a motion to approve the minutes from July 5th?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? All in favor of approving the minutes from July 5th, signify by saying aye.
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 The ayes have it. We next have the minutes from July 18th. Again, you should have those for review. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from July 18th?
So moved.
Second.
Is there discussion? All those in favor of approving the minutes for July 18th signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
The minutes for July 18th are approved. We'll hold those to the side because there's a couple of action items in the minutes that we'll be taking up in the agenda. The first item under old business, and I'm wondering where Jim is performance objectives. I'm not clear what that is. I don't know whether that's looking at the performance measures, or it's not risk assessment, because that's next. I think that's what it is reviewing the performance measures. But this also could incorporate, and this is the reason I'm happy to see the city manager here, this notion of looking at the 2012 strategic plan for the city of Annapolis. Is a document that would set an overall set of parameters for the departmental performance measures, which in turn can then set parameters for individual employee appraisals. So, Mr. Melanoff, you and I've had a conversation offline. Can you tell us where we are in terms of looking at the strategic plan?
Yes, you're absolutely right. As we've discussed, there are really two components to this process in my mind. And I've been working with Tricia Hopkins on the first component, which is to set up retreats with the department directors and with members of council so that we can work at that level on setting up goals and objectives and where we're headed to in a maybe a 30,000 foot level. And then I've been in touch with ICMA, which is the parent organization of my membership in city managers, and have spoken to one of two people I'm going to speak to about running the strategic plan. They're in their annual conference this week that I could not make, but later on Thursday, I have the second person. I've forwarded the previous work to the first person, and I'm just waiting to get feedback on them being able to host us as soon as possible. So that's the status. And I think you're absolutely right. To develop really meaningful performance measures, I think we have to figure out what we want to measure and how. And there are other elements to that too, whether it's, we used to do the National Citizen Survey and things like that to validate whether we're headed in the right direction by our citizens. So that's where I am.
Thank you for that update. And on that latter, the citizen survey, I think that's, oh, here's Mr. Cardello. Morning, Jim. That's somewhat in your province, Alderwoman Tierney, because that's something in the last two budget reports the Finance Committee has talked about, and there's money set aside to conduct a survey. It's my hope that we choose to use ICMA's survey, both because it's been well established, and it'll give us direct measures from our citizens, but also because it gives us the comparator to 500 other communities. And that makes it a very rich source of information for us. So I'm pleased to hear we're making progress.
Mhm.
Is there any discussion or question from committee members?
I saw Ellie had her hand up. Did you have any questions about the survey, Ellie?
Yeah, just well, one little bit of background for those that don't know, and then just a question. The background is the Finance Committee prior year, Alderman Arnett and Alderwoman Finlayson recommended a community survey in and of itself. And so that just wouldn't be sort of a so what situation. You know, we'd have this survey. What do we do with it? Last year, the Finance Committee wanted to tie it into the strategic plan because it is part of that. My question is the performance measures. Let's see, we've made a stab at them, I would say, and we made a very concerted effort last Finance Committee review of the budget to look at them, mostly where they weren't met, and then how could the budget align with improving performance. So are we going to redo them or build on them with this strategic plan? My fear is that they're not going to be, someone has to review them. Some entity has to review them and make them viable. And I'm just concerned on the path forward of that. I don't know if it will be the Audit Committee. The Finance Committee reviews them, but they don't approve them. So I just wanted to know what the future process of performance measures are so that they're not, you know, at risk of just going into the Bermuda Triangle somewhere.
So let me take a crack at that, but I'd like to hear from the city manager. First of all, I think you're being very delicate and kind. I don't see very many measures in the performance measures, and certainly not many rendered by the departments. But in thinking about it from my perspective, it's because they weren't connected to a strategic plan. And therefore, I think we're kind of asking each of the departments independently and kind of de novo to think about their performance measures, and having a strategic plan set of objectives that they need to show how they're meeting them, I think would be very good guidance, helpful guidance for the departments. And then I do think we need to go back. Measures are things where you can actually hear a department tell us, say it's Public Works, who happens to be pretty good at reporting on the performance measures, tell us we met 87% of our goal in our objective number 2. And that could lead to productive conversation with the Finance Committee, but certainly the rest of the council members. 87 is not 100%. Can you tell us why that? And they could say, well, because of COVID, or because of budget shortfalls or staffing losses, all of the things that go to justifying their budget. And to the extent that they exceed, like they exceed goal number 5 by 113%, they exceed by 13%, we can say, gee, that's great. How did you do so well? But also, are your standards rigorous enough? If you can over exceed, maybe we need to think about the level of accuracy. But to me, that's all part of good management, but also very transparent management. Everybody knows what the goals are in the strategic plan. Every department knows how they're contributing to meeting the goals of the strategic plans. And then going down the line, the employees know what they're doing to help their department meet its goals. So, and of course, I admit this comes from my experience as a longtime federal bureaucrat, and that's how it worked there. But I thought it was a pretty strong accounting measure, particularly for all of those managers who are fair about what they're measuring and their measurements. And I found it to be quite a rigorous system. And actually, for me as a manager in the federal system, quite useful, because when I go to ask for promotions for staff or to do a new project, I can say, look at how well we've been doing, and we want to do more and continue this level of accomplishment. So anyway, that's my long-winded idealistic soap opera. But Mr. Melanoff, let's hear from an expert now.
No, I think you're right in how you described it. From what I saw when I was acting planning and zoning director, people were doing it, but there wasn't, I wouldn't say, a lot of buy-in. It was more output measures, and it depends on what you want to measure, whether it's output, you're doing X amount of widgets, or how well you're doing the widgets. And I think that's what we're going to try to do in the strategic planning process, is how well we're doing the widgets. And from my standpoint, when I get a ACM on, that person's primary portfolio will be over top of the strategic plan. Now, whether it works with the audit committee or the finance committee, that can be discussed. But that would be how I see it. And process-wise, I'd mentioned earlier, getting a staff retreat and a council retreat to start the flow towards the strategic planning process review, which the first person I spoke to, she had done it in Savannah, Georgia, and Hilton Head. And I thought there was also some good similarities, particularly with Savannah and us. And then you develop the performance measurements. And then Ellie, we had talked about the surveying tool. I don't know whether I shared it with this group, but we used the NCS National Citizen Survey in Charles County, and it was really a useful document, and I can share that with you. And I think I might have, because I remember Alderwoman Pindell Charles taking a look at it and saying something to me, but I can forward it to you, Ellie, as well, because it also kind of gets the citizenry kind of measuring us in a good way and giving us feedback. And as Ross suggests, they have a database of about, 500 different communities, and they try to put us in like categories and see how we perform next to other communities. So that's kind of where it is. I have a sense of where it'll head from having done these, but there's no guarantee until we all get together and see what we decide.
And in direct answer to your question, Alderwoman Tierney.
That wasn't direct.
No. But her specific question was, who's in charge? Is it finance or audit? We amended the audit committee legislation to include the audit committee having purview over the performance measures. But I mean, this seems to me to be the benefactor of the audit, the performance measures is the finance committee. And it seems to me like a natural thing where we would partner and reinforce each other. So I don't think we need to say, Mr. Meat can't touch Mr. Potato. I hope they're all mixed together and we have a really sloppy but delicious plate, to use a crude metaphor.
Can I just respond to that? I see it as two different reviews. The Finance Committee is, their guardrails, if you will, are monitoring budget. So we look at the performance measures, or at least we did last year, because there were performance measures. We definitely looked at where there was underperformance or where they could do better. Sort of looking at, what the public wants is that if we add more money to the budget, they want to see better efficiency. It's an efficiency review, and where are the dollars best spent? So we look at it in that framework. We don't look at them as, how come you didn't do this and you did that and you did, that might be something on the department head purview. We don't go into, job performance. It's basically a measure of efficiency and where can adding money or taking money away, which we never do, unfortunately,
Right.
Make the government run more efficiently. I do not know what is the purview of the Audit Committee, and I think
All right. So
I'll ask
I think there is a dichotomy. You're focusing on output. I think our focus is more on the input. Are we getting the correct performance measures? And both put together, input and output, leads to outcomes. And that's why I think we have a joint responsibility. It's the outcomes that we're after, better city government. And that's why it's nice to marry it with the citizen survey, because we think we're doing better city government. I'll get to in a second, Jim. I like to talk. We think we're doing good city government, but maybe our citizens think that we're missing the mark someplace or that we're overdoing it. I think that you're right. There's a dichotomy there, but I think the both of them are leading to getting a good outcome. Jim, and then Rhonda.
Good morning. Thank you. I apologize for my lateness this morning. But I wanted to ask a couple of questions with regards to the process for the current fiscal year and performance measures. Now, I understand that we were in a transition year as to asking department heads to prepare performance measures and then to track against it. So what is the process for the current fiscal year that we're in, ending June of 23, with regards to preparing for department heads, preparing performance measures, the quarterly reporting, the evaluation, and finally, are we engaged with Forest Consulting for this fiscal year to assist us? A lot of questions, sorry.
And I think they all fall to the city manager.
Thank you.
The Forest, I have not retained them, although they are available. My goal is to work with ICMA, International City County Management Association, and have the strategic plan, put it together, and then use that. And we may fall behind the curve for a quarter, but I think it's more useful. I think what the discussion that Ellie and Ross had were good, because one is more quantitative output, and police, fire, public works, finance. I mean, they tend to collect data and they can kind of spit it out. Sometimes they're performance based. Fire, how many fires, are we preventing? Public safety, are the trends going up or down? But the rest of us, what I saw was just putting out data, and there wasn't a lot of I don't think particularly substantive or meaningful information. So that would be my goal. Or do these things always work out exactly how you plan? No, because what happens is when we have our staff retreats and the council retreats and you come together, council may want to go in a different direction, because that's the whole idea of doing these. But that is my plan. And hopefully from that, we'll get some meaningful information that the city can continually update and use.
But I think there was an underlying, well, Jim, I think you were asking, are we getting quarterly reports?
That was my follow-up, to see, are the department heads reporting on a quarterly basis? I mean, I know they are given quarterly financial reports for budget purposes, and they're asked to explain certain materials to the Finance Committee. But and I understand that at some point an oversight committee will be determined for the performance measures piece. But is there a process in place for the current fiscal year with regards to the monitoring of performance measures?
Not that I'm using. I'm not
Nope,
using.
no process.
I'm not
Okay.
using the prior year one yet. I don't have anybody other than me, so it makes it a little bit difficult to do everything I do. So the goal is to get assistant city manager on board and then start working on this process going forward. And candidly, you know, the council could say, no, we're going to do it the way we did it before. And I understand that. But a lot of times when you have a turnover and an election, this is when you make these kind of pivots.
Is
I
the
would be-
evaluation of the performance measures, does that fall to the city manager or the department head? I was under the understanding that the department head was responsible for assessing their benchmarking against the standards.
But they report to the city manager.
The data
so-
was being directly gathered through the assistant city manager who departed last January.
Right, the ACM, right.
Right. And we were being queried to send the information in. And soon after that, it became, and there was a monthly reporting, and it's something that I've actually created when I was here before and in other communities. And I see them both tying in together. Is there anything particularly robust that right now on the quarterly report? No. Are we doing a monthly report right now? No.
But before I turn to Alderwoman Pendle Charles, you mentioned something that I think is very important when you were talking about fire. And you said prevention. Now, responding to fires is an output. Preventing fires is really an ultimate goal. I'm not sure it necessarily falls to the fire department, but it really is outcomes that I think ultimately we should be driven towards. So for police, you can say a reduction in the number of murders. And then it's how do you do that prevention? And I think that falls Alderwoman Pendle Charles' bailiwick. But every department has outputs, but then they should be leading to outcomes. And I think for me, that's the ultimate objective of good management is outcomes. Anybody can produce more widgets, but if you don't need widgets, that's not a good outcome. Anyway, I'm sorry, Alderwoman Pendle Charles, you had your hand up. You have
Thank
your
you, Thank you, Mr. Chair. As far as the prevention of fires, my understanding from the fire department, they do a lot of community outreach. They put out a lot of information. They do a lot of visual,
smoke detectors.
a lot of that. So how do you measure that? How do you say, you know, we had a community meeting with community A and therefore they didn't have any fires this year? I mean, that's a little difficult, Mr. Malinoff.
No, I actually think you're right. That's how they would do it, is we want to meet with the communities and do various outreach efforts. We ran our October, which is coming up, replace the battery program, and we were able to hand out X amount of, you know, and then legislatively, whether it's hardwired smoke detectors, or when Alderwoman Turney was talking about the program on Main Street and updating wiring and sprinkler programs, those are the kinds of programs that you could report and how they've been successful in outreach. Now, then the output will be, you know, how many fires have we had? And the paramedic side's a little more difficult. I don't want to go to that, but the suppression side, we can actually look at fires and say, this one had a sprinkler system and it contained it to a certain room, or this one didn't have an electrical fire because we updated the entire system so that it's no longer a risk. So there are ways of doing it. But you're right. There is some complexity to it. But what traditionally has been done is totally output oriented. Several decades ago, there was a big movement on performance measurements, and that was always the debate: is you're just putting out numbers, but how do you base your success? And that's why with the National Citizen Survey, it does give you that kind of basing of success against other communities too, which gives us a broader measure than just against ourselves. We had a police chief here a couple of chiefs ago who, I don't forget how long Mike Pristoop was there, but I remember him once saying to me, wait a minute, I'm starting to measure against myself. That's not fair. He would say, crime is going up, but it's against me, but it's lower than it was before. And that's kind of the nuances of measurement that you get into. But I think all that you said, Rhonda, is how you would start to look at the quantitative aspects of it.
Right.
And a lot of Chief Stokes was really big on that. You remember with him and wanting to get the sprinkler legislation in, and oh my gosh, I was with DNEP at the time, and people were screaming bloody murder about the cost, but that was his goal.
Yeah. My question is, I am very confident that we're going to be able to get this done. That's not a problem with me. My concern, and you've heard me mention it many times, about the citizen input. And that's always my worry. And I'm just going to speak from Ward 3. That's not necessarily top on our list. The two times that we've been successful is when we talked about the survey as far as planning and zoning was concerned, what the residents wanted. And that's when we had the 3-day retreat out at Mount Olive. And that was extremely successful because, to be quite honest, it came to us. We didn't have to come to it. And so when you look at people's jobs and all the other complexities of dealing with family members, because a lot of us live with our parents, with our children, with our cousins that we're taking care of, it becomes much easier to have the thing come to us. And the other thing I want to mention is it was very successful when Office of Emergency Management Director Simmons and your predecessor, Mr. Malinoff, Ms. Sutherland, decided that we would take a look at what we were looking for in a police chief. And we had, I think, 4 different summits, if that's what you want to call it. We had one, I think, at the American Legion, one at the fire department in Eastport. We had one at Mount Olive, and we had one at Pip Moyer. And that was a great opportunity for residents within their own communities to come and give input. So I think the survey is great. It works for some communities, but I think when you look at a survey, sometimes you have to go out and really take the show on the road. And so I don't know how that all fits into how Mr. Malinoff does this National Citizen Survey that's obviously works well, but how do you incorporate the other nuances and complexities of people's daily lives in a survey?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head, because I had asked the same question back in 2018, which is now that people don't have landlines, and how do you actually reach people? And they do a variety of different things, including what you're suggesting, which is we would use the libraries in Charles County. We would go to community associations and a variety of other tools now for survey instruments. I have it online. I don't know whether I'm going to share it accurately, but Ross, do you mind if I share?
No, of course, please.
I think I can do this. Hold on.
But while you're pulling that up, let me also, because Alderwoman Pendle Charles and I have had this discussion often, and I think that we're much more alike than we're not alike. And I remind that Ward 8 and Ward 3 were annexed at exactly the same time, And at that point, Ward 3 was like the Mecca. That was the high end, and Ward 8 was the stepchild, if you will. But to me, the survey is exactly the time when Ward 3 residents can voice their view that they're not being considered or not getting good outcomes from the services that the city is providing. It's the ideal opportunity to say we're all the same, but some people are more the same than other people, and so we're not seeing this like Ward 8 is seen or Ward 1 is seen. So I mean, I think we can actually use it to amplify it. No, I can't see anything.
You can't see it because I just hit the share. So let me try it one more time. It may be. I'm hitting present. No, it's just, I mustn't be able to. Let me try one more time and see if I can do it this way.
Mr. Chair, I have one question, kind of off topic, but I was curious. You were indicating yourself being a federal bureaucrat. Just in 25 words or less, how did you said there were, I guess, mechanisms or things that you used in your employment that was akin to what we're trying to do here?
Yeah, so I was a federal servant for 32 years, most of it as a manager, eventually as a senior executive service at the highest level, working at the secretarial level. I started with the strong employee performance measures. And the way I did that was I asked the employees to draw up their own performance measure. And they all had to have at least 2 critical elements, and they could have 2 others. And then there was an element that they could put in there that was a special project that they wanted to work on that could help build the case for their next promotion. So to me, the bedrock of everything starts with the employees. And you can have all the noble goals and so forth. Now, it turns out I was lucky. I started with great employees, and we got a lot of really good, fun things done. But it really started at that level. And I think that's why I'm so big on the strategic plan and the performance measures is ultimately, I think it benefits the employees, and the employees therefore benefit us because they're having some control of their own destiny in how we're measuring them. And they're also have an element in there that allows them to succeed and go on to the next level. So that was more than 25 words, but you know me.
Yeah.
But that's where it starts.
Now you are an economist with the Department of
Health and Human, well, first with Commerce, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, and then with Health and Human Services.
So you were able to do that in not of a widget making situation, I guess.
Yeah, and actually I got some awards for the leadership I was showing in the management techniques. And I won't take full credit for it. I also had a very active relationship with the Employee Assistance Program. And it started with me and my senior managers. And then we moved to the branch chiefs. And then we started involving the employees. And it gave everybody a voice. You know, I didn't want to be Ross the boss. I wanted to be Mr. Outside. I loved being down at the secretary department, but I needed to make sure everything was going well back home. But yeah, there was a lot of assistance from outside to help develop that thinking.
Okay, thank you.
I don't think we're going to share it.
No, but I did send it to you. So
okay.
So and Julie, if you can share it with the other members, because I don't have all their emails. I gave it to the council members and Julie.
Okay.
If you can confirm that you got it.
I'm glad we took the time for this, and I think some of the other things will go quickly, but I must say I've always found Ms. Ewing to be silent but sage. Did you care to make any comments before we move on to the next topic?
The only thing I wanted to say, it's funny you asked that because I had a question in the back of my head and I was waiting to see if it was going to be answered as you all were discussing. But my question is, if we are essentially going to restart this with a strategic planning process that's going to be preceded by a community survey, what is the length of time we're looking at before we get back to the place where we have performance objectives again in place, ready to execute on?
I don't think it is going to be preceded by a community survey. I think it's the process, as Mike outlined, was retreats with the department heads and retreats with the council. Basically, I assume, Mike, starting with the 2012 document. I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah,
Why reinvent it?
I mean, that is a good question, and you're right. She does ask, because it can work both
I hope
ways,
it's so.
Carolyn. And I don't see it happening. I mean, these usually take a couple of months to get off the ground, and I have my experience in doing these, but I would rely a little bit once we decide on who we retain for the strategic plan on the process. But I like using the National Citizen Survey as a basis for checking on our overall progress afterwards. And the council is reflective of the community that elected them, so they can give information that way. We, in developing the 2012 plan, actually did have a lot of community meetings. You know, I don't know whether we do that this time or not. I can't guess, but
Can I ask a clarifying question? I honestly thought to understand that there was going to be some sort of community survey that was preceding this process. So is that going to happen now at the same time as you're formulating the strategic plan, or what's the steps? What's the process there? I didn't understand.
I haven't developed it yet. I would like to rely on the person that we end up hiring to kind of give direction. I've seen it both. When we did the strategic plan in 2013, when it was finally out, you know, frankly, I did the survey right around the time that was completed, and the new administration, the Panlini's administration, came in, and we were getting ready to share it, and I departed. So I've seen it at the beginning as well, and it's a good baseline to sort of help reinforce what the council and the staff may realize is going on in the community and what the community thinks is their priorities.
In my experience, you know, a strategic plan can take a year from beginning to end to flesh out. So
it can,
yeah.
And that's kind of what Ross is trying to avoid, I think, because we had literally done that with the previous one. And there are difficulties when you use an old one, because I think, as Alderwoman Pindell Charles pointed out, we've had some things happen since then, like the pandemic. And so I brought that up with the one of the two people I spoke to, saying there are issues that we need to bring this to date. So candidly, and you're right again, which is the person who's going to facilitate us may come in and say, you know, you need to do it a little bit more of a robust process, not a bring to date. I explained it to her more as a bring to date of a current plan, but it can sometimes take longer. You're right.
So just because my name was taken in vain, I was anxious to get started. I think that the strategic plan should take the amount of time that it needs, and if it needs a year, that's fine. But you know, we really didn't take advantage of the 2012. It sort of sat on a shelf, and I want the strategic plan, this is my personal desire, to be a living, working document. I want it to be something that is plasticized and put on people's desks, certainly council members' desks, and you know, is what we're doing helping us meet the strategic plan. So I think it needs to take the time it needs, but Alderman Tierney wants to make a comment.
Oh, no, questions. Question. So to address Caroline's concerns so that we're not, for lack of a better word, rudderless, what are we doing now as far as performance measures? What are you telling the department heads?
Well, I've been on the job now a month. So what I will tell you is what was going on preceding me was little to nothing. So what I'm telling the department heads, and we'll tell them when we have our first department head meeting, is that we're going to be proceeding on the strategic planning process to develop the performance measurements based on that. That would be my goal, because candidly, what I was saying wasn't, we may have been giving you information, and certain departments are certainly capable of doing that, but it wasn't being there wasn't a lot of energy being put into it. So we're not doing a lot right now.
But another good question, and I also think another good observation. All right, we've kind of on the old business covered A and C together, the performance objectives and the strategic plan. I do want to talk about risk assessment briefly, but I want to do it in the context of something that came up at the last meeting and something I've been hearing from former members of the audit committee offline, which is this desire to get more closely involved in managing departmental operations. And I think there's a real discussion that has to happen with the city attorney and making sure that we're more of a council function, that we're not overstepping. But I will tell you, I had dinner at Acque Aldu last night, and I was watching all of the empty circulator buses streaming by. And this is part of a broader discussion that I've been having with the city manager, which is, I think it's time to rethink our transit. And I think get out of thinking about transit and thinking about mobility. But I'm wondering, and I'm just planting the seed, unless you want to go there, I'm not sure how that coalesces with risk management, but certainly it seems that running empty buses over and over again is not an optimal operation. I don't know whether it's a topic. I'll turn to you, Jim, really, because risk assessment is not my bailiwick, but I'm just planting the seed there. I do think a strategic plan and better performance measures will help us look at opportunities for risk assessment, but I'm willing to leave that at that because we have 2 subcommittee reports to get to, and it is 8:45. So having preempted any comments from Mr. Cardillo, we have 2 subcommittees, the Audit Practices Committee, which is chaired by me, and the Community Grants, which is chaired by Alderman Tierney. I have little to report. I did contact MML, and I was put in contact with Jim Peck, who is a longtime research analyst for MML. We've had 2 conversations. He had hoped to get me information by Friday, but we talked on Thursday and he told me it'll be a Friday, but not probably until next Friday. But what I asked him to do was to look at other municipalities, probably mostly the larger municipalities, Salisbury, Cambridge, Rockville, and so forth, and look at what they do for their audit processes. And then more specifically, how is the legislative branch involved in that audit process? And talk to him a little bit about the risk assessment, but talk to him largely about, and certainly the city manager can weigh in on this, if we in fact are segmenting ourselves into legislative and administrative. I don't think we really do have branches, but we do have these different functions. What is the oversight role for the city council as set out in the charter? And how much can we get into stepping on people's administrative toes through a audit function, audit process? And again, in talking to people on the outside, I talked to Jared Lippman, who was the person who pushed the formation of the audit committee. He basically saw the audit committee as fairly passive. He didn't think we needed to meet more than maybe 4 times a year, and basically just to do an overview of the audit functions that are internal to the city. I talked to Al Kirshner, and he was much more activist that we really need to use the audit committee to make sure that we're having the optimal delivery of services. It's quite a spectrum. I'm probably somewhere more in the middle, but certainly don't want to do anything that is not in keeping with the thoughts of the city attorney, but more importantly, is not unproductive with our professionals who are hired to run all of our services. I really don't want to be a Budinsky and say, well, if I were the boss, I would do such. Well, you're not the boss, so thank you, but we'll see you later. So I think there's a balance there. But anyway, Jim seemed to really, first of all, relish having this task. He's sort of semi-retired, but did seem to understand. And so for our next audit committee, I'm pretty hopeful. And my experience with Jim is that he's very thorough. So I think for our next audit committee, we'll have a good report. So that's it from this subcommittee. Alderman Tierney. I volunteered you for this committee.
I believe my task,
And you accepted with grace, but how are we doing?
let me confer with my committee.
Yeah, right.
I believe my task was to evaluate the city's what's the word I want to
Community
use?
grant.
The community grant process, in particular, our allocation of monies to nonprofits and non-secular entities. The issue in question was an allocation to a church, and they, without names, they did not want to. They did claim that they did not need to do to form a nonprofit, and leaving us in a quandary because in so doing it would jeopardize sort of the establishment clause in that we would be making a secular contribution. I mean, a non-secular contribution. So a little bit of background I did. With the help of my friend at MML, just for background, the United States recently issued a 6-3 decision in 2022, this summer, that really affected the Establishment Clause. And for background, the Establishment Clause of the Supreme Court provides that, quote, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. And it has been interpreted to apply to both state and local governments. What this case did was, I don't know if you remember, but forgive me, I'm not the particulars, but it was a coach that knelt down and all that. And the Supreme Court gave him that liberty to do that as long as he did not do any coercion. So anyway, so how does that affect local governments? How it affects local governments is that it does it kind of gives some flexibility to the interpretation of the clause. But here's here's the absolute that I got out of my research, that a local government must maintain a policy of non-discrimination. It talked about how there was not recent, but there was a court case addressing public prayer at the beginning of a council meeting or whatever kind of meeting, and how that's, again, allowed as long as you don't disparage a religion or somebody's belief. So with the nonprofit allocation, what we're asking, let me get my other piece of paper here. So in short, the Supreme Court relaxed, the rules against violations, of the Establishment Clause. And so thereby, the government can allocate more money to churches when the purpose is a secular one, secular meaning non-religious. So you have a church that's doing a good thing and they want money to do it. And that church has to prove that the money will be used solely for that non-secular purpose. So, and then also the city has to monitor that for compliance. So what churches do, so that there is a clear line between church and state, if you will, is they set up a nonprofit. And that is not in our policy, but I recommend that maybe we do put that in our policy and make it very clear, just to draw the line. Because that's what we're asking them. Look, hey guys, we need to know that you're using this for a non-secular purpose. We don't, even with all the relax of the Establishment Clause, we cannot discriminate. We cannot give you money because you're, a certain religion. We need to support your nonprofit, if you will. And we ask that these organizations form a nonprofit and be very forthcoming on how they intend on using their money. Nonprofits are required to. The other thing too is that in getting this money, nonprofits are required to file tax returns, and churches are not. I don't want to put Julia on the spot, but I know she was part of the review process of our community grant allocation, and I think I would like to know if she followed basically these guidelines in the review of these nonprofits, specific to churches, or what.
I'm sorry. I think that for the particular church we're talking about now, it sort of followed from the Backpack Buddies. And so as a committee, we didn't examine it too much because we'd given Backpack Buddies had been allocated money for years. And so that was kind of our thinking on that point. So.
And you're saying Backpack Buddies didn't have a 501c3?
They're Backpack Buddies of Heritage Baptist Church. So we didn't look into whether or not they had a 501c3. It was just too outrageous.
I saw Alderwoman Pendle Charles' hand was up, but Rhonda, can I hear from Mike first, please? Yes, Mr. Malno.
I think this is a great discussion because I think it was Laura Gutierrez who came to me about the allocation of those funds to Heritage, and then one other church. And we had that discussion, but there isn't a real firm policy, because I said, well, what did the Office of Law say? And I remember the debate was pretty black and white. So whatever you do in defining it is really prudent right now, because although we moved forward, it wasn't clear on what our direction should be.
When you say move forward, my recollection was we did not give the $5,000, but I made a promise that if the rules were followed, namely that a separate entity was established, I would bring forth a budget amendment to allocate the $5,000. There's no doubt, and this is in my community, the group is doing a fantastic job. Mm-hmm. And I hate to see them hampered because of, I don't want to call them technicality. I'd call them rules and rules that we have to follow.
Well, the Constitution.
So, yeah, that's a.
That.
Right.
But I honestly, Ross, I will say, I think there's still confusion out there, and it really would help if you all, the council, define the policy, and then that is in the Office of Law for us to follow, because right now, I can't say that's the case. I think it's what Julie was saying. Backpack Buddies was being done at Heritage in the past, and it's secular, so that's okay. But then there was another church, I think in Eastport, and there was a question about that. And so, yes, anything that you all can do to define it within your purview would be helpful.
So that falls on the alderpersons in the group. Ellie, but I did want to get to Rhonda.
Go right ahead, Alderwoman.
Yeah, just for clarification, I do have a position from our law office.
You're so good.
with the-
That's where I was going. I can take my hand down now.
Yeah, my other committee member said that. No. There was this disclaimer that this is just their recommendation, and you know, we can the city and administration and council is free to do as we please. And their basic position was that the church has to prove that the money will be used solely for a secular purpose, and the vehicle to do that is to form a nonprofit. That's the clear line, and it could. And then let me just elaborate and say that it could get into muddy waters if we establish a precedence and we say, okay, on this one it's okay because we know this, and then a church can come to us in a later date and say, well, you gave it to them and they didn't have a nonprofit, they just had this program. I don't know what's involved in the church forming a nonprofit. That's one thing that I didn't look into. I mean, I guess it's the same procedure as anyone wanting to form a nonprofit.
It's not onerous, but it is time consuming. And the major thing is to get the EIN, which is what seems to take the longest amount of time. We have 2 more items on the agenda. Alderwoman Pindle Charles, did you have follow-up?
Yeah, just quickly on Alderwoman Tierney's communication with our Office of Law. From what I can see from a lot of churches, a lot of them are forming community development corporations to take care of this issue. I'm sure it is, from what I gather, it is an onerous process, especially for the EIN number, but a lot of them see the benefit of doing that. They know they can't do it through the church itself. So a lot of them have formed these CDCs to take care of that issue. So I think from what I can see, and I could be wrong, and Mr. Chair, please correct me, I think the church that we were talking about, I think they have gone in that direction.
Yeah, I think they have too.
Mm-hmm.
So Alderwoman Tierney, I want to thank you. That was a very good report, very productive, and an outcome which falls on you and Rhonda and I. And we'll work with the Office of Law and the city manager. But wow, one subcommittee meeting and we're done. This committee's done. The alderpersons have more work. But thank you for that.
I'm a nerd. Another one.
All right. Yeah. So your committee assignments now, you go to the end of the line in terms of getting another.
I'll let my staff know.
Yeah, right. The next item on the agenda is our meeting dates for for calendar year 2023. It pretty much remains the same schedule as we have been holding to, which is the third Monday at 8, with 3 notable exceptions. On January 17th, we have, because of a holiday, I presume we need to do Tuesday meeting. On February 21st, a Tuesday meeting, and June 20th, a Tuesday meeting. No meeting in August. This is not time sensitive, but is there anyone who has issues with the schedule as set forth? Jim.
Ross, just one question with regards to that. The materials for each meeting, is there an expected date that we can expect? Is there a date that we can expect the materials for the upcoming meeting to be out? Should it be the Friday prior or the Thursday prior? Or what?
Yeah, I think the Wednesday prior, but that's to go off on a tangent here. One of the things that I've been working with a couple of alderpersons on is making the audit committee an official standing committee of the city council, which would then put us under the purview of the council associate and would have all of our stuff automatically posted on Granicus I Legislate, and I think would greatly facilitate the administration. Unfortunately, Friday was the last day for our lovely Takia Green. So right now the council doesn't have an associate. But it is something I wanted to, once I've had, and there's pros and cons to doing it. We are an unusual committee because of our makeup and our budget. But I think that could help a lot with the administrative processes. It's not my feeling that I would be running this committee the way Fred's husband runs the Financial Advisory Commission. I don't have the time, and so I really depend heavily on administrative staff. Having said that, this is a burden for our finance staff, who already are both shorthanded and have a heavy schedule. So another reason for wanting to make the change is to take this off the backs of people who have a lot of other work to do in finance. And Julie, you can weigh in on that if you want, but it's a work in progress. I understand your comment, which is a nicely presented criticism, but we will we're going to be working on it. The finance staff have been fantastic in pulling together the information, and but I think then we might want to consider a change in venue.
Thank you. I understand that city council members and city staff are involved in this activity on a regular basis. As either a citizen member or a representative from another committee, we have to re-engage with audit committee activities. And I just want to plan, so
Right.
if I can get material, either a day or two in advance, that I can put the time and effort into being best prepared for the meetings.
Right. So
Thank you.
just to put a finishing touch, you're right. It is the council and it is the staff. I would point out that the staff are full-time and we're part-time, whatever that means. So we get stretched a lot of ways. And so there's a prioritization. We're now after 9 o'clock, but the last item on our Alderwoman Pendle Charles. Yes.
Yes, I'd just like to weigh in on us going from a non-standing committee to a standing committee. I have one huge objection. That means the meetings go from virtual to in person.
Well, it does not necessarily mean that, but that's
I'm
something
being facetious. I'm being facetious.
Okay. Well, that was actually in the back of my mind to ask that, because it does say on this agenda for the coming year virtual, and that's fine. It's easy for me to make coffee and get online. 8 o'clock is a little early for my taste, but for people who are a living, I can understand why you don't run us running past 9 o'clock. The last item on the agenda is a report from the Finance Committee. Are there some highlights, Julie, that we need to know, or are things chugging along just fine?
Things are chugging along. We are short-staffed. It feels like every time we turn around, somebody's leaving, but we're working on the audit. We're doing the hard close today. So
Oh,
sure
excellent.
Jody will be posted on that. So that's
Congratulations on that. Jim, did you have your hand up? Yes.
Yeah, just two questions on that. One, the status of the prior year single audit. Is that, if I went back to my July notes, that was still in process.
Yeah, and at this point, it's entirely being held up by CLA. They've had things they needed for months. They just started feeling a tremendous backlog. So it is due September 30th, and we've tried everything. Jody has tried everything.
Okay,
she
so
knows.
we got about 11 days to file that ACFR. All right, and then secondly, that was an objective question, and a subjective question. Working with this new audit firm, better, worse, about the same? Because this new audit firm came out of the audit committee's recommendations.
So we are at the very beginning. I'd say we're about 10% in to what we need to do. They've been super responsive to us. They seem willing to give as much as we're willing to give on our end. And to that end, as much as it takes, I want this audit out by December 31st. So that's the goal. It seems like even with some of the staffing changes we're going through, that it's still possible and probable at this point. So
Thank you. That's all I
I've
have.
been there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Alderwoman Tierney.
Yeah, just quickly, I wanted to mention this before when Jim asked about quarterly reports, quarterly performance reports. I just wanted to reiterate that we do get quarterly reports from the finance department of the budget. I just wanted to make sure that you're aware of that. It's a one-page summary sheet of the budget. With the last one received, pretty much closed out the last fiscal year. Do you get those, Jim?
I don't get them.
No. I understand that there is a process in place for the finance committee and the council to review quarterly financial performance. And then I was asking for what's the parallel on the performance measure side and what's the process?
Right. Thanks.
All right. I'm sorry we ran a little long, but frankly, I thought we had a very good discussion on a lot of topics, and one excellent subcommittee report, another in process, mea culpa, mea culpa. So with this, at this point, I would accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor of adjourning signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye.